Hello and welcome to Humans of Reliability. Ashley from Rootly here, and today I am joined by a guest who I think a lot of you are going to be really excited to hear from. I'm here with Kolton Andrus, the CTO and founder of Gremlin. So, Kolton, I will toss it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning, afternoon, time independent on the internet. Yeah, my name's Kolton. By way of introduction, engineer by trade. Worked for a couple startups before I ended up at Amazon. Ended up building a fault injection chaos engineering platform for Amazon. Had a lot of success there. Worked on performance optimization for a little while. Did my core of duty, finished up with my time at Amazon, went and joined Netflix. This was post Chaos Monkey, so I knew they were bought in and had some great ideas, but I had the opportunity to come in and help build their next generation fault injection platform, do a lot of work with teams to go do failure testing. I think kind of the claim to fame is when I joined, we were at 3 nines of uptime. After the work we did, we were at 4 nines of uptime. So we really saw some good benefit from the work we did. Was at a conference talking about what we had done, ran into a VC. He was like, you should raise some money, start a company. And, long story short, that was the path I took. Ended up founding Gremlin, been working on Gremlin for the last 7-8 years, out trying to make the world a more reliable place.
Amazing. And to start off, for the folks who are maybe not as familiar, we've got a pretty wide range of viewers. Some folks really experienced, some folks just kind of starting in the industry. So, how do you describe chaos engineering or failure as a service and just what it's all about at kind of a high level?
Yeah. So we'll start with, an analogy. I think chaos engineering is a bit like crash testing a car or getting a vaccine. What we want to do is we want to inject a little bit of harm. We want to see the failure condition so we can understand it and prevent it or lessen the impact of it. Our complex distributed systems are a lot like organisms, and things are always happening. You've got a flu virus floating around in there. Well, your body learns from that, learns how to adapt, learns how to defend against that. I think similarly, when we go inject failure, it helps us understand how our systems respond and how the people respond that operate. So I think that's kind of the nutshell of chaos engineering. I'll go on my soapbox and say, chaos engineering, fun name, maybe a bit of a misnomer. One of the things I've learned is most people think chaos engineering must be chaotic. It means we must do it in this kind of hairy-carry, helter-skelter kind of way. And that's not actually what I recommend. I think that's not good engineering. And so chaos engineering, to me, is really, thoughtful failure injection to understand the system and engineer for the chaos. But because a lot of people think chaos engineering is just rebooting hosts and, shutting things down and seeing what happens, a lot of what I've talked about, which fits your theme, is reliability. That's what people want. That's what people care about. So here's my rebranding: chaos engineering, fun name; reliability engineering, the more serious grown-up version of what we're doing here.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know you mentioned you came into Netflix a little bit after the infamous Chaos Monkey. Maybe we'll actually take a step back. I have a little blip just from the repo for people who are maybe not super familiar. Chaos Monkey is essentially a bot that randomly terminates VM instances and containers, creates a little bit of chaos, breaks things on purpose to identify those failures. And I know you said you came in a little bit after, but I'm kind of curious about if you saw any initial cultural resistance or a sort of shift within Netflix or the places you've worked as these types of things have been implemented. Have you found that people tend to be resistant at first? Is it kind of a tough sell, or how is that process tend to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one half, Chaos Monkey is as much a social solution as it is a technical solution. When Netflix was moving to the cloud, now you live in a world where hosts are ephemeral and a host could be replaced at any time. And engineers 10, 20 years ago relied on the box being there. And so there were, states stored on the box. There were things, specific to that host that people cared about. And then when that host goes away in the cloud, that causes a failure, causes an error. And so, I think Netflix made a brilliant management move, and they said, hey, this is what reality looks like. We're going to force you to prepare for it in staging in your environment so that you have to tackle that pain head on and address it. And what that meant is, people really had to feel the pain and go fix it. So I think, at Netflix in general, my observation was that people were culturally bought in. They had heard the talks, they'd seen, some of the internal voices talking about, hey, here's why we're doing it. Here's the benefit to us and our customers. Here's why this is, a good engineering idea. So people are generally brought in. As I've, taken this out into the market, I think I've seen, the whole gambit of responses. A lot of teams, their opinion is we're not ready. We're scared is the answer. We're afraid to go run these tests because we don't think that we're going to pass. And I'm empathetic there, but my advice is it's kind of like, hey, I want to get in better shape, but I'm afraid to go to the gym. It's like, well, you got to get in there. You got to go start putting in the effort to get better, or else things are never going to change. I think there's a handful of people that are like, hey, I think this is a bad idea, but I see a lot less of that now. I think, 10 years ago, people were like, you're crazy. Why would you ever do this? And now they're like, okay, I've heard of this. I've gotten familiar with the idea. It makes sense. I think the last piece is there's a lot of people that, think it's a great idea, but they're not really allowed to do it. They don't own the infrastructure. They're not on the SRE team. They're writing code or they're doing aspects, but like they're not really given purview to go do the kind of tests they want to do. And I think that one, it's just unfortunate. That's, you gotta help the company kind of mature and evolve in how you do it. You got to go make security or the SRE team your ally in that you're doing it, intelligently and, thoughtfully instead of, again, kind of willy-nilly.
Yeah. And from what I understand, if I recall right, I've actually done Gremlin's chaos engineering certification. And if I remember correctly, you don't necessarily have to start in live production. You can, is this right? Like you can experiment in more of a sandbox environment first. Like obviously you're really going to get the benefits in a live production environment because there's so many things you can't predict. But for those who are like a little scared and want to see how it unfolds, I think that is an option.
Yeah, it's really, again, what we're here to do is mitigate risk and apply some engineering best practice. And so if we can go do testing and find a bug in staging, great. We didn't put anyone at risk. So the risk was low and we could find and fix the problem. The issue is there's a set of problems that exist in production that don't exist in staging. They're related to your load balancer, your traffic, your security group, how you shed traffic, how you route DNS. Those things you will never find in staging. And so, yes, do everything in staging that you can, but ultimately test the system that customers rely on. And there's ways to mitigate that risk, even in staging. You don't walk in day one, first thing you do, you don't break all of staging for everybody and go, what did we learn? You run it on a single host. Did that host fail the way you expected? Did the software on that host behave as you wanted? If it did, great. Now run it on 10 hosts or 100 hosts. It's this step up kind of approach. And you can do that through staging. Go from staging from 1 to 10 to 100 to all of it. And then when you go to prod, reset back down. Run the test on a single host. You got 1,000 production hosts. You run it on one. That's 1 in 1,000, potential risk there. You're mitigating the risk a lot more. And so again, step back up until you're comfortable running. So I think this is some of the problem with the name chaos engineering is a lot of people think it's got to be in production all at once, go full bore. And once you explain that there's this, very rational, iterative approach that builds on itself and mitigates the risk, they go, oh, I was thinking about it the wrong way.
Yeah. And I think something you said there that I want to touch on is something we should just talk about more in general, which is that your staging environments will never be a perfect replication of your production environment. And this is something I've seen, like being on the incident management side so many times. You're writing that postmortem about how some change broke production, and everybody goes, why didn't you test it before you shipped it? And you're like, testing and staging is so different than deploying to production, and it's not always going to catch all the dependencies, especially depending on how your users actually use your product. They can also, in some cases, like I worked at Shopify, where each individual user can also access the code of their storefront. So there's just like this infinite amount of ways that code can interact with other code that can break things. So I just love that call out that like, yeah, you can do things in staging, but it's not actually as reliable to find all the sneaky little places that might be hiding in prod where things are going to break.
100%.
Something else, actually, speaking of my previous employer, we actually had a phenomenon called Chaos Monkey that existed in many different ways. And I think since Netflix, this Chaos Monkey idea has taken a life of its own.
Mhm.
Um, and something they've talked about this externally, so I know I can talk about it. One of the examples of a chaos monkey at Shopify was there was a bot that would go through everyone's Google Calendar and it would wipe recurring meetings with more than two people in it. Because we all know how those sneak up on you. And suddenly you've got all these biweekly syncs with 10 people that are unproductive. Um, and at random with no notice, usually maybe once or twice a year, the chaos monkey would go running through everyone's calendars and eliminate those meetings. And I'm curious if you've seen any other interesting takes on this idea of injecting chaos and maybe like some more unexpected ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've heard of that one. And, it's not about software reliability,
No.
right? That's about organization cleanup. I do a Slack. I'm pretty meticulous about deleting meetings. I want them in. I'm lazy. This is my pitch for everything. I'm a lazy engineer. I want to run a reliable system with the minimum amount of work. I want to mitigate as much risk so I don't get woken up in the morning. I want to sit in as little meetings as possible. So I don't know. I do my regular spring cleaning, Google Calendar, cleanup. In terms of, interesting ways in which people have thought about this. Yeah, I think, one of them that's similar is, we talk about running these chaos engineering experiments and these game days, and typically they're a very collaborative heads up, here's what's going to happen. The flip side to that is you can go test it how a team responds to an incident by artificially creating an incident. And so, we talk a lot about the software and how it fails, but how do you test that your incident response process works effectively? To your note about, there's drift in different parts of the systems. On-call calendars, is the override set up correctly? Is the right escalation done? Does the person, are they able to join and just, start investigating in a reasonable time? If they have no foreknowledge, how do they get familiar with it? The nice thing about that approach is if you've got, some sort of fault injection tool like Gremlin that's got a halt button and some safety features, you can go run it. You can let them, figure it out and diagnose it, but you've got that safety net of being able to revert it at all times. And, not quite the same as just shadowing someone or being part of an on-call rotation, but I think that's, again, we think a lot about the software, how about the people on the process side as well?
Yeah, 100%. I actually have a talk on running like full org type of game days. And one of the things I recommend is to use a tool like Gremlin to create a very realistic environment. And that's sort of a distinction I draw between game days and like a tabletop exercise where you might talk through, oh, we would communicate this way, we would do this step. But it's very different when you are actually in Slack in some sort of replicated environment and trying to execute the things that you think you would do. That's where you find a lot of the toil and the things that are way harder than they should be. So I fully agree with that. Something you also mentioned just about being like an engineer and having that engineering mindset of I don't want to waste my time. I want to automate what I can, reduce that toil. I'm curious to hear about your journey going from like a full-time software engineer, computer science degree background to running an entire company, and obviously doing so successfully because Gremlin is still there and still killing it. So what was the learning curve like as an engineer with like this great product idea, but someone who, to my knowledge, had never built an entire org before? Like, did you rely a lot on instincts? How did you learn to do that?
Yeah, well, failure is the key, right? You learn by making a lot of mistakes, and how quickly can you adapt is maybe not the exciting answer, but the realistic answer. Yeah, I think I'd had the chance to be part of management at Amazon. I'd worked closely at some of the startups I was at before Amazon and Netflix with the leaders. So I had a sense. I'd seen things run. I'd seen people do it a few different ways. I think we live in a day and an age where, getting advice is not your problem. In fact, it's how you filter to the advice that is effective and works well for you. One of the hardships of startup life is, how you balance success and growth. When things are going well, there's a tendency to just double down, go all in. And when you're building a company that you want to last the long term, when you want to build a great product, you have to be careful about that all in mentality, because it can lead you to over hiring or, focusing on the wrong things. And so I think, as many, we've gone through a journey where we had a lot of success. We had a lot of customers happy. We scaled up, and then we decided, oh, you know what, we got to find the right balance for us. And so over the last couple of years, there's lessons learned in how you run a frugal and efficient company, how you really make sure your customers are successful. I think, a bit of the engineering advice is, hey, all engineers are like me. We're smart people. If you give them this tool, they'll know what to do. They'll know how to go make it work. That's also not true. A lot of what we built in our initial product was the platform, the Legos, the building blocks that really allow people to do all the things. But that was not enough. For big companies, you have to help them change their culture and their process. You need to help, the SRE team may have a lot of background and history here and be really effective, but your average engineering team might be quite busy and, only have an hour to spend on this. And so how are you going to arm them? How are you going to guide them in a way that makes it easy? And so that's where, I realized a couple of years ago, I needed to have somebody else come run the business, and I needed to go focus entirely on the product and on the engineering side. And I'm grateful for my time running the company. I may do it again. We'll see. I learned a lot. I think I could do a lot better next time around. But I've enjoyed being CTO. I enjoy being technical. I'm an engineer at heart. How do we really evolve the product? How do we make sure our customers are really solving those problems? That's what I'm excited about doing. And that's what I've had a lot of fun doing the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure, coming back to engineering with that added context of running the entire business and seeing how all these pieces fit together, like you said, you can have the best product in the world. And if there's not a wedge to really get it into a business and to help them see why they might need it. Even I've learned a lot about just like company budgets, and like just because someone likes it doesn't mean that there's actually like an existing budget to draw from to buy it. And you have to understand like how to get into that procurement process and all of that. It's been really fascinating to learn as, we're also going through the startup motion.
The sales and marketing side of the house, it's harder than it looks. It's hard to get in and convince people. It's hard to navigate organizations. It's hard to make sure you've answered all the questions and really help people. Yeah, you get a lot of folks that, are well-intentioned, that want to bring something in and make a change. But if they don't have kind of the purview and the authority to influence the organization, it cannot go anywhere. And so how do you understand that? And that's really, it feeds into product and engineering. You want to build a great product, you have to understand those challenges. You have to go try to sell the 5 teams and have them tell you, hey, no thanks, try again. That there's a piece of that I, maybe not every engineer needs. I think they do, but maybe not. But every product person definitely needs that exposure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Our director of engineering here is he actually oversees engineering, product, and design, and those are all grouped together. And he is an engineer by trade, but he's very product minded. And it's kind of interesting to see, I think, like coming more from the marketing side. I think people perceive marketing as much more of an art than it is. It actually has a lot of science, and then vice versa for engineering. There's actually a lot of art in there. It's not all science, and the two disciplines, are very different, but also very alike in some ways, and that they're maybe misunderstood sometimes.
Yeah.
I have one more question on my list for you, and this is just zoomed out, not specific to your job or anything, but just in general, what would you say motivates you?
Well, I have 5 kids, so I'll tell you, that's where my motivation comes from. Got married young, had kids young. I've always had a focus on, helping prepare them. Now they're all growing up. They're, one's graduated from college, one's in college, one's a couple in the end of high school. But I think that's really been, that's been my focus beyond just engineering pride. I love being a good engineer. I love seeing good systems. I'm a builder. If you look at my video game library, there's a fair number of, I love to just build and grow things over time.
Love it. 5 kids will definitely motivate you to do probably anything. That's the kick in the butt in any direction that someone needs, especially 5 teenagers.
Keeps you humble. Keeps you humble.
Yeah, I have a almost 7-year-old, and I'm already humbled on a daily basis, so I can only imagine. The last question I have for you, Kolton, is just if there's anything you want to share about, what's going on at Gremlin, what you've got going on, talks, events, career opportunities, anything at all you'd like to plug.
Yeah, well, I think since you mentioned it, we are hiring for a couple of engineers. So always happy to talk to sharp folks that are interested in this space. Feel free to DM me or reach out to me. I think Gremlin wise, I alluded to this a bit, but I think we built our original fault injection platform. The last year or two, we've really been focused on how do you make that easy to scale across an organization. So, we built things like test suites that allow people to just know what tests they should run. We integrate with their alerting and monitoring so that we can run the tests and automatically tell them if they passed or failed. That's also a built-in safety mechanism. So if things start to go sideways, we'll just halt it and clean it up. I think one of the things I've learned in this space is it's hard to get promoted for doing the right thing. There's a lot of folks that work in reliability, and you can get fired if things go wrong. But how do you show you've really improved things? How do you really show you've made progress? And it's often just as good as your last outage is what it boils down to for the business. And so in thinking a lot about that, came up with this idea of a reliability score. I mean, certainly novel, but we go through and measure how people are testing these aspects of their system and help them score. And the important part there for me is gives people a baseline to know where they began, and it allows them to see the progress they've made in mitigating issues across their system. And really, lastly, like if you can't take it to your VP of engineering and CTO and say, hey, we're much better today than we were before, and here's the proof. It's hard. It's hard in a very authentic way to go say, hey, we've done a lot of good work, and we think, we've really accomplished something here without something like that. So I think those are some of the thoughts we've had. Those are some of the product evolutions. If people are interested, you can go try it for free, or you can come chat with us, and we'd love to tell you more.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kolton. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and we really appreciate you taking the time. You can find plenty more episodes of Humans of Reliability here on our website, and we'll see you next time.